2 days after Grandpa's funeral, I found a letter behind a photo in one of his old albums. The one where Grandma's holding a baguette like a sword, old, and addressed in handwriting I'd only seen once before, Grandma's. When I gave it to her, she just stared at it for a long time, then said, "He had this." She didn't cry. She just sat me down and said, "Well, I guess you should hear my part of the story." She didn't ease into it. Grandma never does. Once she decides to tell the truth, she starts swinging with both fists. She leaned back in her chair, tea in one hand, the letter in the other, and said, "It was spring of 1944, and I was trying to keep a bookstore alive in a town that had already been declared dead. Then she told me this. Rouen looked like it had been trampled by God. Half the buildings were gone. The other half were waiting to be. My little bookshop, the one my parents opened before the war, had taken a shell through the back wall but somehow refused to fall. The roof sagged, the shelves leaned like drunks, and the front window had been replaced with a canvas tarp that flapped every time the wind passed by too fast. But it stood. So did I. That day, I was restocking what was left of the classic section. Mostly singed Baudelaire and angry chunks of Hugo, when I heard boots outside. American boots. Clumsy, too heavy for French streets. They always sounded like someone trying to sneak through a cathedral with bricks tied to their ankles. And then he walked in. Didn't knock. Didn't ask. Just stepped over broken glass like it was confetti and looked at me like I was an actual person instead of a sad French girl behind a busted counter. He smiled, awkwardly, said, "Bonjour, mademoiselle," in textbook French that sounded like he'd practiced it 10 times in front of a mirror and still didn't believe he got it right. I didn't smile back. I pointed to the door and said, "No soldiers." He blinked like I'd smacked him. Then, instead of leaving, he bent down and started picking up books. Not gracefully, not correctly. I watched him shelve Zola next to Verne like they were roommates, and part of me wanted to yell. The other part? It noticed how gentle he was with the pages. He came back 2 days later, and again the next week. Said he was on patrol, which was a lie, obviously. My shop wasn't on any official map, but I let him pretend. He brought things. A tin of soup. An apple once. A chocolate bar so melted it looked like a mistake. He always offered it like he was giving me treasure, and somehow it always felt like he was. His name was Derek. I didn't ask right away. I didn't care. Or maybe I just didn't want to care. But the first time we had to hide in the cellar during a raid, he said it, quietly like a confession. Derek. Not private. Not soldier. Just Derek. He didn't try to kiss me. Didn't touch me at all. Just sat there between crates of moldy paperbacks and looked at me like I wasn't broken. Like I wasn't the girl who lost her father to a firing squad, or her mother to a van in the middle of the night. Like I was still someone with a story worth hearing. That made me furious. Because if I wasn't broken, then I had something left to lose. Still, he kept showing up. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes he just read out loud. Badly with the wrong rhythm, but it didn't matter. He read The Hunchback of Notre Dame once, and I told him I related to Quasimodo. He said he felt more like a gargoyle, stuck, stony, and always watching. We laughed. Real ugly laughs. The kind that hurt your ribs. And that's when I knew I was in trouble. Because there's no space for love in war. It doesn't grow like a flower. It squeezes itself into cracks, surviving off scraps and stolen time. And sooner or later someone notices. That someone was Henri. Henri was technically part of the local resistance. He liked to pretend he was in charge. Mostly he handed out curfews and looked angry in doorways. We'd flirted once, briefly, before I realized he only liked women when they were obedient. He noticed Derek. Started asking why he kept showing up. Why I kept letting him. I told him. Because he doesn't talk like he's the main character in a bad play. Henri didn't laugh. Instead, he started whispering. Quiet things. Dangerous things. The kind of things people believed when they wanted a reason to hate you. Meanwhile, Derek kept being Derek. He brought me cracked teacups he found in abandoned homes. Trying to explain baseball. Sitting quietly when I didn't feel like talking. He never asked me for anything. Never pushed. Just kept showing up. Kept choosing me. Which, of course, made everyone else assume I was hiding something. And maybe I was. Maybe I was in love with a foreign soldier, in a city where no one trusted their own shadow, in a war that had already taken everything that wasn't nailed down. But he made me feel like I hadn't disappeared. He made me feel visible. And in 1944, that was more dangerous than any weapon. Grandma stopped there for a second, sipped her tea, glanced at the folded letter I'd handed her earlier. She didn't open it again, just held it like something old that had finally come up for air. That was the beginning, she said, before everything went sideways. And then she looked at me with that sharp, knowing stare that cuts through every polite lie. Next part's messy, eh? She added. Might want to make some tea. She didn't wait for me to say I was ready. Grandma just kept going, like the story had been waiting behind her ribs for too long and finally saw daylight. So, Derek and I had our little secret world. A broken bookshop with no roof. A cellar full of banned novels. An American soldier who didn't know when to leave. And me pretending I could keep things simple by never admitting how badly I wanted him to stay every time he left. Of course, it didn't stay secret for long. Nothing does in a town halfway flattened by bombs and gossip. It started with Henri. It always starts with a man who thinks he's entitled to you. Henri decided that I, the girl who wouldn't play resistance housewife, must be sleeping with the Americans to feel important. He cornered me behind the old bakery one morning with that righteous little sneer and said, "You think because he smiles at you, he loves you, he'll leave. They always do." I told him to go practice his dramatic monologues elsewhere. He didn't like that, so he started whispering to people. Said I was getting too close to the enemy. That maybe I was feeding Derek information. Or worse, that maybe I was feeding Derek lies. It didn't matter that I'd run messages through checkpoints. That I'd hidden weapons under my floorboards. That I'd once kept a resistance fighter alive with nothing but boiled rags and hope. None of that counted anymore, because I loved the wrong man. And then came Collins. Derek didn't tell me about him at first, but you could smell the problem in the air like cheap cologne and gunpowder. Collins was Derek's commanding officer. American, shiny, the kind of man who thought war was just a ladder for him to climb. He liked rules, liked control, liked knowing who belonged where. And Derek? Derek kept wandering into my shop like he didn't care if anyone saw. Like love wasn't political. Like being with me wasn't a ticking bomb. I should have pushed him away. I know that now, but I didn't. Instead, I let him stay. Let him help me rearrange a section I wasn't going to sell. Let him fall asleep once with his head on a pile of poetry. Let him talk about stupid things like Chicago winters and canned peaches. And then he showed up one day with a bruise blooming on his cheek and a silence I didn't recognize. He didn't tell me what happened. He didn't have to. Later, a British medic came into my shop looking for old maps. He owed me a favor. Told me Collins had warned Derek to stop visiting the French girl. Told me Derek was being watched. That someone, probably Henri, surprise, surprise, had filed a report suggesting I was a security risk. And then, the medic said something that stuck in my throat like a nail. Your boy punched his superior officer. Just once. Just hard enough to get noticed. After that, Derek started pulling away. Not all at once. But the change was obvious. He'd still visit, still hover around the shop like a ghost with bad posture. But the sparkle was gone. The jokes got fewer. The smiles stopped reaching his eyes. He didn't say, "I'm protecting you." But that's what he was doing. Idiot. Because pulling away only made it worse. The resistance boys stopped talking to me altogether. The people who used to greet me in the market now gave me sideways glances and overcharged me for onions. And then one day, two of them, kids really barely 17, followed me home, pushed me into an alley, asked me questions I didn't answer. They weren't rough, just full of themselves, like they were doing the world a favor by checking in. They tore open my bag, ripped up the letter I'd written Derek, the 5th draft, I think, the one where I finally used the word love. Then they let me go, and I walked home like I wasn't shaking, like I hadn't just been reminded that, to them, I wasn't a person. I was a liability, a threat, a question mark with legs. That night, I wrote a new letter, the 6th one, angry, honest, no poetry, Just the truth. I love you. I don't care what they say. I don't want you to protect me. I want you to choose me. And if we live through this, don't you dare disappear. I folded it, sealed it, gave it to the last person I trusted, a cousin with a bicycle and a scar from the German side of town. And then Derek was gone. Not a goodbye. Not a note. Just gone. The next day, someone said his unit had been moved out overnight. Reassigned. Henri walked around like he'd won something. And I pretended it didn't hurt. I kept the shop open. Dusted empty shelves. Boiled soup I didn't eat. Pretended my chest wasn't full of knives. Then, weeks later, a different soldier came in. British. Nervous. Carried himself like someone trying not to be seen. Said his name was Harold. Said he bunked with Derek. Said Derek had been asking about me every damn day. That he'd written letters but they weren't allowed to go through. That he still carried a photo of me in his jacket, the one someone snapped by accident the day I fixed his collar. Harold slipped me a note. Just a few words in Derek's handwriting. I'm still here. Please wait. And I did. For the war to end. For Derek to come back. For anyone, to tell me it wasn't all in my head. Grandma paused again. She looked tired but not weak. Like someone who had already survived every kind of heartbreak and now just found it funny that I thought I needed tissues. He came back, you know, she said softly. Just walked into the shop one day and said, "You didn't burn the place down. That's a start." She smirked, then looked down at the folded letter still in her lap, the one I'd handed her 2 days ago. That's when I thought I knew everything. She didn't say it with bitterness. She said it like she was reading off a grocery list. We were in love. So, of course, everyone thought I was a goddamn spy. Then she kept talking. Derek came back like nothing had changed. He showed up one quiet morning in October, just as I was wrestling with a warped bookshelf that had finally given up. No warning. No build-up. Just a pair of familiar boots stepping over the threshold like they'd never left. I dropped the entire stack of Camus onto the floor. He didn't say hello. He didn't say I missed you or I'm sorry. Derek wasn't that guy. What he said was, "You didn't burn the place down. That's a start." So I hit him with a paperback. And then I kissed him. From that day on, we stopped pretending. He still had duties, curfews, all the usual military leash, but he came to the shop whenever he could. We ate soup that was mostly water, listened to records too scratched to be useful, and slept with the windows open even though the air still carried the distant sound of planes. It wasn't peaceful, but it was ours, and that made people furious. The resistance hadn't forgotten the rumors. Henri had definitely not forgotten being rejected. And Collins, that puffed-up jackass in uniform, still had a grudge to settle. So when Derek reappeared, so did the whispers. They didn't come at us directly. That would have required courage. Instead, it came in the form of little humiliations. Derek's name vanished from the patrol list. His transfer papers got misfiled. I went to the bakery and got handed a loaf with mold like it was a gift. Then came the note on the door. One morning, I opened the shop and found a piece of torn newspaper pinned to the front. No signature. Just 4 words scrawled in pencil. "We see what you are." No one claimed it. No one had to. The handwriting didn't matter. I'd been labeled. And in wartime, that label sticks like tar. Derek saw it later. He didn't say anything, but I watched his jaw tighten like he was grinding his molars into dust. After that, we didn't talk about the outside world. Inside the shop, it was just books and sarcasm and the occasional stolen kiss. Outside, it was side eyes and silence and a creeping sense that someone, somewhere, was just waiting for an excuse. It didn't take long. A week later, I got grabbed again. Same alley. Different set of resistance boys. A little older this time. A little cockier. Said they'd heard things. Said they wanted to ask me a few questions. Asked if I'd been offering services to the Americans in exchange for protection. I told them they could shove their questions somewhere anatomically impressive. They laughed. One of them grabbed my arm hard enough to leave a bruise. I didn't flinch, because that's what you learn in war, how not to flinch. How to let them think they've scared you when really, you've already died 100 times and come back stronger. They let me go. But not before they made it clear I was being watched. Every move, every glance, every time Derek set foot in the shop. And still, I didn't stop seeing him. Because screw them. Screw Henri and Collins and everyone else who thought I needed permission to feel human again. One night, Derek and I sat on the floor with a single candle and a bottle of something that tasted like rust and regret. He looked at me and said, "I want to take you with me when this is over." I laughed, out loud. "You want to smuggle a French woman onto an American troop ship?" He grinned. "I've smuggled worse." I told him I'd think about it. What I didn't say was that I'd already packed a mental suitcase the moment he came back. Then, just like last time, he was gone. One day he was in the shop, grumbling about French dictionaries, and the next he was smoke. No letter, no warning, just orders. They pulled his whole unit overnight. Said it was urgent. Ardennes, we heard. Total chaos. I never found out if it was just bad timing, or if Collins had a hand in it. Wouldn't surprise me. I didn't cry. I went home, sat down, wrote him another letter. I told him I understood, that I'd wait, that the war had already taken so much. But if he let it take us, I'd find a way to haunt him. Then she leaned back, and just like Grandpa did when he told me his version, she rewound everything to the end of the war. I didn't see him for months. After his unit vanished overnight, Rouen turned into a fog of freedom and rebuilding. The Germans were gone. The Allies had moved forward. People started reopening shops, repairing houses, and pretending everything would be okay again. I didn't. I waited. I told myself it was over. That wartime love was never built to last. That maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe Derek had gone home. Maybe he'd married some American girl who didn't flinch at loud noises. But then, one rainy afternoon, he walked through the door like no time had passed. He looked thinner, tired, carried a limp like it was no big deal. He was holding a mug, chipped and familiar. "I think this is yours," he said. It was one of mine. He'd taken it the last time he was at the shop and forgotten to return it. Or maybe he'd done it on purpose just to have a reason to come back. I didn't say anything. He put it down on the counter, looked at the shelves and smiled. "You didn't redecorate." And I said, "You didn't write." He looked guilty for half a second. Then he said the same thing I'd been saying to myself for months. War. That was the whole explanation. One word. And honestly, that was enough. Because sometimes love doesn't need grand gestures. Sometimes love is showing up after hell and saying, "I made it." We didn't talk much that day. Just sat in silence for a while, listening to the ceiling creak and the wind argue with the canvas tarp that still served as our front window. 3 weeks later, we were married. It wasn't romantic. Not in the cinematic way. No white dress. No violin quartet. Just me, Derek, a few friends, and a promise that we wouldn't let the world tear us apart a second time. We moved, had kids, then grandkids. You know the rest. Grandma went quiet after that. She looked out the window like she could still see him. Maybe 25 again, with dirt on his boots and that crooked grin he used to get when he thought he was being clever. "He always said I was the brave one," she said finally. "That I survived more. That I held us together." She gave a short laugh. Bitter. Fond. Funny. Isn't it? That we spent decades thinking we were each other's rescuer. Maybe that's the point. I didn't say anything. What do you say to someone who just casually handed you 70 years of heartbreak and forgiveness? She slid the letter across the table. "Keep it," she said. "It doesn't belong to me anymore." And maybe she's right, because that letter wasn't just paper. It was proof that love isn't loud, that loyalty doesn't need a spotlight, that two people can survive a war, lose each other, find each other again, and still keep a piece of the past quietly folded in a shoebox under a lifetime.